Why are you and your colleagues focused on looking at digital media and its impact on families and kids?
I lived in Seattle and I practiced as a primary care pediatrician in the Seattle area in 2010 and 2011, which was when the iPhone had been out for a few years and the iPad was just coming out. And I worked in a really tech-savvy population who were bringing mobile devices into the exam room a lot more. And I found it fascinating that kids were using technology to calm down after I looked in their ear, or parents were actively using their iPhone to look up facts about Coxsackie virus, if I had just said that. And I was like, this is a brand new dynamic. The fact that these little computers are now mobile and they're interactive, it's so much different than just a TV or a video game that sits in your living room or another room in your house and isn't coming into all these new spaces and interpersonal spaces too. So that got me interested in it. Then I went to my fellowship training in developmental behavioral pediatrics in Boston. Boston Medical Center, where I trained, is the biggest safety net hospital in New England. So it has a lot of lower income and immigrant and really stressed out families. And I was learning that the biggest buffer, or the biggest source of strength for families who were struggling with adversity, is early relationships, is the parent and child knowing each other, loving each other, having activities together, the parent helping the child understand their emotions and how to deal with the stresses that come up in their life, how to understand themselves. And now that we had all these new technologies that were in these interpersonal spaces, it was this potential either good mix or bad mix, depending on how you used it. And so my first study on this was in 2013. We decided to just go do public observations of how families were using mobile media in fast food restaurants, because we wanted to capture meal times, which are an important time when face-to-face interactions happen. And public observations they're anonymous, so it was easy to take field notes like we were anthropologists and just really observe what really happens. I didn't want to survey parents about their media use because I felt like I wasn't sure it would be accurate. We're all just grabbing these devices here and there throughout our day, and our recall of what we do might not be accurate. So we observed what was happening. We saw lots of parents staring at their phones for long stretches of time and sometimes getting irritated with their kids. And we kept looking for positive times when maybe they were watching a video together or taking pictures, and we saw that like only 4 or 5 times out of the 55 families we observed. We more saw negative interaction. So this was like my first peek into what the dynamics are interpersonally between a parent and a young child when a mobile device is in that space. And then I've built multiple studies since then, trying to really understand what's the mechanism there. I don't want to blame parents for the fact that we all have to be connected to our devices now, because our whole lives are in these phones. So I've done interviews with parents to understand their perspectives. I've done studies asking parents to tell us how many times a day does the device enter into an activity with your child. And so, we've really tried to answer the question in a way that'll help parents know how to create some balance. Not to say, oh, parents are doing this wrong, because that's too common of a narrative in the United States. And I know from my clinical work as a developmental pediatrician, I need to join with the parent and know who they are, what are they going through, how do I help them with who their child is and what struggles they're facing in that moment, and help them problem solve to create a little bit more balance in what they're doing, specifically around technology.
With 9, almost 10 years of background, of research of you and your colleagues looking at this topic, what would you say are the positives that you've found from having these devices in our lives and in kids' lives?
The positives I mostly hear from the parents. Like when we've interviewed parents, they say, this feels like a lifeline to me. I know I can be in contact with my child's school or my ailing parents. I know that it's a sense of safety, that we have this immediate connection to one another. It's a source of social support that single moms that I've interviewed have said, this is my social life. I need this. This is how I get laughs and get ideas about parenting through social media. The converse of that is that sometimes they say, unexpectedly, there may be someone I didn't want to contact me, or I sometimes just want some alone time, and now I feel like I'm constantly connected or expected to respond. A lot of parents talk about enjoying video chatting as a way to connect with loved ones that they can't be with all the time, like having an aunt read their kids' storybooks once a week. That was one story I heard that, they really wanted to maintain that relationship. And that's what I do on Saturdays. It's like, my parents now have this regular time where we eat breakfast, kind of Skyping together. And it's great. They really are up to date on what's going on in my kids' lives. And it's a nice regularity of social contact that is a really important part of attachment or of children's everyday experiences. That regularity and knowing that you can have a connection to someone. I've been asked, is a virtual connection the same thing as that real life connection? And no, you can't touch, you can't hug, you can't snuggle, but you can tell stories, you can hear about the other person's perspective, it's so funny, sometimes my kids will see something going on in the background of my parents and say, oh look, something is blooming, in the outside, or what's that on the refrigerator? So it gives us a way to think about what's going on in the other person's life and space. And then they want to show my parents, all around our house, things like that. Now, I don't want all of this conversation to be about my parenting experience either, because every parent experiences this very differently, and I've struggled too with trying to figure out what's the technology that matches my kids the best, and which ones kind of they're irritable after, or they're beating each other up afterwards, or we're just doing it because we're bored and we can't think of anything else to do. And so every parent should, I hope, feel empowered to figure out what's the best mix for their family, and that there's not one size fits all type of way to use media.
How do you go about doing that? You suggested something called a family media plan. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I was part of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council that wrote the media guidelines in 2016. I was in charge of the ones for kids about 5 and under, because my focus is on early childhood, and because of these early relationships are so important during that time period when children are building attachments and their self-regulation skills. We wanted to do something practical for families, because there's one thing to give guidelines and just say, here are the things that are the best practices or that are supported by evidence, but just issuing guidelines doesn't actually make an impact with a lot of families. So we wanted to give a more practical tool. It's a web-based tool where you can plug in who your children are, what ages they are, and then you get a few choices of what are the different kind of healthy or balanced technology use behaviors that would be appropriate for that age. And they're not just limits or restricting media, they're also finding positive media, finding pro-social, really well-designed media that, so we even made recommendations for PBS Kids or Sesame Street or other really good content creators that have been proven, through research studies to actually help kids learning. Whereas we wanted to steer families away from, apps that were making false educational claims, or, really violent media, or media that would just be kind of distracting or kind of confusing to kids. So trying to help guide parents towards the best content. We also recommended Common Sense Media as a website that has reviews, it has very age-appropriate guidance. They even have pages of parent questions, parent concerns, that are just all the classic concerns I've heard from parents. Is it really okay for my child to spend 3 hours a day on Minecraft? Are they learning anything? What is up with these YouTube videos where they just watch other people make slime or play, their own video games of like, what should I worry about, and is this okay? And the great thing about Common Sense Media is they keep up to date. There's a new app or website or video game, it feels like, coming out every hour or second. And researchers, we take things slow. We write a grant, get the IRB approval, we recruit participants. We try to be really careful that all the data is accurate before we publish it and other researchers review it and it finally can hit the news. That takes years, and that's frustrating that the technology that's being introduced is so rapid. I mean, Pokemon Go took only like 16 or 18 days to reach 50 million global users. And in 15 days, I, can clean some data and run a few analyses, but it's like just a small portion of what we can do in our research timeline. So back to the family media use plan. The other thing we liked about it was a sense of flexibility, is that we weren't giving parents, you gotta do this, you gotta do this. It was helping them choose what would work best for the way they lived their lives. So for some families, it might be, let's pick a few unplugged spaces in our house or a time of day that might be dinner time. Are you worried about your child sleeping? Then let's work more on avoiding media in that hour before bed when the blue light from devices might suppress their melatonin, or they might get so aroused and excited from what they're watching that they have trouble settling down. For older kids, we had more specific things about seeking out opportunities for digital citizenship, finding cool websites for kids that are really positive, that are trying to make positive changes in the world, that are trying to help us understand other people's perspectives and think more critically, rather than, only using social media that's fun and that's all about connecting with friends, but might not be really making you think. Diversifying the content and avoiding some of the more negative or, what to do when you come across something that makes you feel uncomfortable. What to do when someone says something to you that feels like, is that cyberbullying? Is that just something I'm misunderstanding? How do I navigate that? And we really recommended regular conversations in the family, starting at an early age, to help families show their kids that, number one, this is worth talking about. It's something we should be talking about, that there's no shame, that we're all learning it together, parents and kids at the same time. So when we hear something interesting in the news, when we come across something odd or funny, we share it with each other in person, and we think about it and talk about it, and that will help reinforce the idea that kids should approach media with kind of a little bit of a critical mindset, that this is something that someone else is creating with their own agenda. Maybe they want to make money, maybe they want to sell ads, or maybe they aren't fully thinking about what it feels like to be a 12-year-old and have your first phone, So, and it also helps make sure that there's ongoing conversation between parents and kids.
At what age should parents put together a family media plan? And then the next step would be, how do you get started?
I've heard things like parents should start when they're expecting a baby, just thinking about it. I don't mean putting together an actual plan, but your life is going to change so much when that baby comes. And there's so many changes to your ability to have social contact with friends, your sense of self. All of a sudden you have to readjust into this parenting role that you might not have ever imagined before. Your work might change, your relationship with your partner might change. So there's all these new stresses, and each of those might somehow influence your media use. The way that you seek social contact, the way that you seek a little bit of like soothing or distraction, the way that you might, I've had patients who want their fussy babies to calm down, and so have found that putting them in front of a TV screen, you know, is one effective way to do that. And we really don't recommend it because it's number one, an infant at that age can't yet process anything from a TV or a mobile device. Really, they're just looking at the lights the same way they would a mobile, and looking at visual stimuli is sometimes calming for infants. They might just kind of slow their body's movement down, stop fussing as much, but it looks, because their visual attention is on the TV, it might look like they're watching. And so sometimes that gets families into a habit of using the TV or a mobile device as this calming tool. And it displaces the times when, as a new parent, you have this new challenge of tolerating your child's fussing and distress, and also figuring out what to do with the emotions that it brings up in you. My basic thought is the earlier the better that we think about this, and that you can set your family on a healthier trajectory of media use. Because once your child starts using media to calm down a lot or as one of their favorite activities, it's a lot harder to go backwards and then to convince your intense 2 or 3-year-old that there's other things they need to do, and especially to convince your 16-year-old that there's other things to do.
How do parents get that information about parameters? Like how much is too much?
And we've struggled with this so much, even within the decisions on writing the guidelines, is that many parents want a hard and fast, give me a time limit, give me an hour, 2 hours, just let me know, I'll put on the timer, I'll say the doctor said we're gonna take this away. And they like those hard and fast rules because it makes it easier for them to enforce. And maybe that's because their parenting style is more like that, or maybe they feel a little bit of a sense of loss of control because media is currently designed to be so engaging for kids. It has autoplay, it has all these like stickers and rewards and coins and all these other things that keep children really engaged. And it can feel even harder to try to, get your child off of it. But I have had other families say the idea that there needs to be a hard and fast rule makes them feel guilty if they can't meet up with that. I've had parents say, well, I need them to watch TV while I cook dinner, and I don't want to feel guilty about a parenting choice I'm making that they're getting this time every day, while I need to do something that helps me as a parent relax. Or, when I was a parent of my first child, I remember I started letting him watch this 20-minute video called Baby Poetry that my mom gave me when he was 9 months old, right? So I totally was not following the guidelines at all. But to me, it was, I washed the dishes, and he sat there and he watched these beautiful little animated poems. So I thought like, oh, this is probably okay. It's not violent. It's, and then it was over. And we would sing the songs, and then I got ideas of what to sing to him. I learned all these poems that I then would say to him at night, and they calmed him down. And so I think one of the reasons I feel more flexible about letting that be part of the parent's decision is that if you're at least making a conscious, intentional decision that makes you feel like, I'm gonna do this because it helps me do this, and I'm going to use it as a learning opportunity for me too as a parent. If you let them watch something like Sesame Street or Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, there's content in those shows for parents too. Daniel Tiger's mom is singing songs with him about how to calm down by counting to 4. Or there's like little things you learn about how to talk to kids about their emotions or about sharing that you as a parent, don't know by intuition. So I do think there's a real plus. By using good content, you can learn new ways of thinking about child development or new games or ideas. And I love when kids media is designed with little nuggets of ideas for parents. Like Curious George talks about, a certain like science-related topic, and then at the end they have like, here's what you could do at home, and you get a few like paper towel tubes and like some marbles, and you build something sciencey related to what just happened. It makes the parent's life so much easier to be like, yes, here's something we can do on this snowy day where I'm out of ideas, and the child's really interested in it because Curious George just did it. So this idea of, as a parent, if you want to use media as like a constructive, creative, or nice source of information in your family's life, it's less about the time limits and it's more about how you're using media, and that you're kind of planning it out ahead of time as like, well, I really want him to learn, if you have a preschooler who you're really interested in learning more about science or technology or friendships, that you might choose the PBS or Sesame Street or other quality early content that's related to that.
As children get older, are there any hard and fast no's when it comes to a media plan from your perspective?
The American Academy of Pediatrics did recommend against lots of violence in media. The research is conflicting about whether a lot of first-person shooter games or other violent interactive media, is contributing to violence in real life. But it can be a time like with Fortnite where you're on it for so long because you want to get to the end and survive, and if you get off, you lose your shot. Some of the video games are designed in that way that you really need to stay on for hours and hours in order to successfully complete the game. So it's trying to avoid ones that are displacing the other things that you need to do as a teenager. So as a teenager, you need to sleep. Sleep is so important for not only mental health and focus, but also obesity risk and cardiovascular health. As a teenager, you need to build your sense of identity and friendships, and some of that can happen through social media. We want a lot of it to still happen in real life, when you have to actually watch someone else's facial expression and respond to it in real time and deal with conflict in constructive ways and laugh together and be able to do group activities. They could be sports, they could be clubs, or other sorts of things that help the child learn how to collaborate as a group and not just be all about their own ideas and their own agenda. Other hard and fast, I'm trying to think if there's any other things that we recommend avoiding. I mean, I think when we wrote the guidelines 3 years ago, I don't think we even knew all of the different stuff that's available right now that might have to do with, hate speech or other content that can be really fascinating to a young mind that's trying to figure out, who am I and what do I think and who do I align with? And so we might, next time we rewrite them, we'll have to think hard about if there's things that we really want parents to try to help their kids avoid. I think with the way that media comes at us, though, through feeds and through suggestions, you can't always avoid all of that stuff. And so I think it's more important that families set up an expectation that if you see something weird, let's talk about it. If you see something that seems a little bit, hate speechy or cyberbullying or something else where someone's taking advantage of the medium to do something negative towards someone else, we should talk about it and, think about what that means and how you can react to it. Not just be a bystander, but, maybe help the victim in that case. So that's I think that there are things like, try not to let your child stay up all night playing video games. Like, there probably are some extremes like that we really would like families to help avoid. But there's so many other things usually influencing that behavior. When I've had patients where children are staying up all night playing video games, There's lots of other things going on. There's often a developmental or behavioral or mental health concern happening at the same time. There might be a learning problem that's made the child disillusioned with school, and therefore they're school avoidant and they stay up all night and then sleep during the day. There might be family stresses that are leading to communication difficulties that have led to parents feeling like, I don't even know what he's doing in there, I'm just glad he's quiet. So it's hard to say, oh, just don't let that happen, because there are so many other processes in the family or in society that have led to that, that it's not really fair to put all that onus on the parent when, really it would probably need to be much more of a multi-system approach to help that child.
There's a difference between our television watching and our mobile devices. Can you tell me a little bit about why that's important to make that distinction for families?
The concept of screen time also, I don't use it much in my research because, like we talked about, some parents really like the idea of a time limit and that's the way their child consumes media. Like their child might watch Netflix or Hulu or something on TV, and so they have a, how many episodes and how much time they can watch. For other kids, if they have a mobile device, they may not be as aware of all the times, the pickups and how long children are on it, or if it's in the room with them, they may not be aware of that time consideration. And so in my research, we try to use other variables that have to do with how often the child is accessing the device throughout the day and whether that's happening during meals or car rides or bedtime. So it's about the place and so kind of the context of it, where they are, who they're around. It makes a big difference for toddlers and preschoolers if they're watching together with a parent who can then reteach, like I was talking about before, when as a parent you're like, oh, I learned something new from that and now we can go talk about it. That is much more educational for children than the child watching by themselves. That depends on the age too, but that's the most important, kind of between ages 18 months to about 3 years, is that critical window that co-viewing really helps them understand what happened on media. The design of the media in terms of being interactive versus kind of I don't use the word passive because you still think quite a lot when watching like a 20 or 30 minute show. And you also follow a story arc, and you get this like long continuous sequence of events that you have to think about what happened. Whereas with interactive media, sometimes it's more these short bursts and bits of information that you're getting. Research has shown that the more there are too many enhancements that are distracting from the underlying educational goal, the children don't learn as much from interactive media. So we've studied ads popping up in the middle of children's apps. And if there's just irrelevant stuff popping up that your child suddenly has to switch their brain from, oh, I was looking at this video about nature, and then all of a sudden I'm tapping away an advertisement for an app, that causes a break in their thinking. So they may not learn as well from a very distracting app. We're also trying to research, does it matter if the app has so many rewards built in? Does the child only focus on the rewards, or do they actually care about the underlying learning process? If it all becomes, I've played apps with my kids where they're like, I'm so good at this app, I keep getting presents, and coins. And I'm like, well, what did you just do in terms of the actual learning activity? And they're less focused on that than this fun kind of consumer part of it. So we need to know more about those design aspects that influence how kids respond to the media that we give them. So again, that's more than screen time. And the last thing that I research is also, are we watching media together and using it as a shared social activity, or are we each on our own devices in parallel? And so parents' use of technology it has been a focus of my research, just because it can be then displacing some of the language interaction or the social interactions that are so important to young kids. Again, it's a matter of the dose and the timing, and parents have told me, yeah, it's okay if I just like check a few emails and then I go back to what I was doing, but what if you see something that's really stressful? And then that's in your mind, and it's kind of cast this shadow over the rest of that hour that you're spending with your child, where you're kind of toggling between this stressful work thing that you're thinking about and talking to your child or managing your child's behavior. So there's just so much more complexity than just screen time. The WHO just put out guidelines about limits that are very strict like that, about specific time limits, and we in the American Academy of Pediatrics still had some time limits, but also wanted parents to know it's not just this. And especially the time limits are most important if you're worried about obesity risk, because the research has shown that above an hour to an hour and a half of kind of passive entertainment, like sedentary media use, that's when obesity risk increases. But not all families are worried about obesity, so that's again why the guidelines can be flexible.
You'd mentioned a website. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Is that a starting place for parents?
Yeah, yes, and it was built into the American Academy of Pediatrics website, HealthyChildrenorg. So we decided that it would be a nice resource to for anyone who was going to HealthyChildren.org looking for media resources. That's one of the first things that will pop up for you, as well as a number of different articles about different ages, different developmental or behavioral concerns and media, or just what are the positive things you can do with media. So this website, it's pretty simple in terms of navigating. We've actually just done a survey of parents to try to get their feedback to say, is this everything you want? Like, what else would you want on here? They've told us things like they would like it to be all something they can save on one page, so that they could like print it out, or they could, I would love it if they would put it on their fridge or save it as their lock screen on their tablet or something, so that it could be a little visual reminder that this is a plan we thought up. For pediatricians, I sometimes tell them to like bring it up in the office so you can talk through and show just how easy it is to kind of click through and enter kids' ages and things, and look through and really evaluate, yeah, this sounds like something I might want to try, or no, that would be too hard for us right now, or no, we're already doing that. So you kind of can pick and choose what feels like the best fit for your family. For parents who have kids who are interested in planning together, that's, I think, the best, is that if you had a school-age child or a teenager and you really wanted to talk about media, you could bring this up and say, all right, let's look through this together and see which ones we like, see which ones that just, aren't really what we need right now, or that we disagree with, and that's fine. That's your family. We want this to be like a talking tool to say, oh, like they're telling us to do this, could we try that? And maybe pick one or two things that you think your family might like to try. I don't want families to feel like, oh, we need to rehash everything in our household, because that's not realistic. That's really hard to do. But if you pick one or two things that feel like, yeah, I'd really like my kids to get to sleep earlier, so maybe we will push back, the time that they finish watching their videos till this time. I would love that for parents to even like do their own home experiments. Let's try this for 2 weeks, see if it works, and then kind of come back and rethink things.
Can you just describe for me what your involvement was?
My Council on Communications and Media through the AAP is a group of media researchers, people who write content for the media. Like they write their own health blogs, or they, have a really active social media presence as a pediatrician, or they write content for other health websites, or they appear on the news a lot. So they really know how to communicate to families the science that we as researchers were trying to compile. So it was a collaborative effort that a few of us took the important kind of scientific points that we thought were most relevant for families that might have to do with finding more unplugged times and spaces, or having device curfews, or having times for conversation about, different content around media. And also finding positive uses of media, that we are going to video chat more, that we're going to have family movie night more. I mean, I really recommend family movie nights because I think it's something all people in the family can enjoy if you pick a movie that kind of works for everyone. I love having parents pick a movie they watched as a child and then letting see how their own children respond to that movie, because it can be a source of humor and funniness. It can be a source of we were watching, Swiss Family Robinson, because we were going to Disney and I wanted to show them Swiss Family Robinson before we went to the treehouse. And then I realized halfway through the movie there's racial stereotypes in that movie that we would never put in a movie now. And so I was okay, we're going to talk about this right now. How do you represent different people and genders and cultures in media? That's an important concept for kids to know. I mean, my kids are so used to me dissecting media with them all the time that they're probably either sick of it or they're over savvy about things. But I think kids are eager to look behind the curtain with media and kind of know who made this, why did they do that. They're so fascinated when you go to a place like Disney or Universal Studios to see, the cartoonists decide to draw it this way and they made it this way. If you think about the same thing with YouTube or with some of their favorite apps or websites, you might be able to say why do you think they did it this way? Why do you think that video came up right after that video? Why do you think you got that ad? Or I'll say why do you think I got that ad for, some sort of face cream? That I want them to feel who's kind of wanting to interact with them through the media the same way that we want, to reach out through media.
If there was one thing you would want to make sure that parents know, what would it be?
That they can do this, that it feels overwhelming, that it feels like you have this tidal wave of new technology coming at you. And the biggest thing I heard in interviewing families was this sense of no locus of control, that this is not something I can handle because it's coming too fast. I'm not tech savvy. It's an intergenerational thing where all my kids get it and I just don't. Or a sense that, their friends are going to introduce them to it anyway, so I might as well just let this all happen and not try to proactively plan it or feel like we're trying to steer this enormous bus that's, that I'll be honest, we don't have as much control because we're not in control of how the media is designed that's winding up on our kids' devices. We don't always feel like we have control over when we need to be answering email or answering texts or different sort of things that are coming through our devices. But if parents can, maybe decide on one or two things they want to do to keep updated on what's going on in the media that their kids consume. And that might be through getting on the Common Sense Media newsletter. They send out an email newsletter every week about here's the new social media app you should probably be worrying about, or what's up with Fortnite, or is Avengers a little too scary for my 8-year-old? So it's really, really practical parenting questions that they might at least stay up a little savvy on, and then they can pass that savviness onto their kids. So what I also say is digital literacy and savviness is probably the best thing we can do to teach our kids, because technology is going to continue to be a really important part of our world. It's going to be part of our jobs, our social lives, how we consume news and information, and helping raise children with the mindset that they can understand the media that's coming at them, both the content, but also why was it sent to me this way, or what message are they trying to send across? I can question what comes at me through the media, and I can maybe decide to make my own that I feel reflects better, human values or things like that. I think those are, we help children build digital literacy by having conversations about the tech that's around us. I tell parents to talk out loud if you're using technology, because when you look at someone holding a mobile device, you have no idea what they're doing, on the other end of that screen. And so just saying hold on, I'm texting, Mary, so that I can, we can arrange something, I'll be right there. You're kind of showing kids by demonstrating how you use media in healthy ways. Part of digital literacy is also learning how do we react emotionally to our devices? How do we feel sucked in by our devices sometimes? So kind of reflecting on your own interaction with all the fun technology that sometimes feels like it's drawing you in, and how to resist that sometimes and actually put it down and pay attention to the person who needs your attention right now. These are all really new and sometimes overwhelming skills that I think we need to teach our kids. But whenever I have conversations like this with either kids or parents in clinic, they love it. They want to know these things. They want to feel in control. So, that's my biggest message to parents, is that you don't have to do it perfectly. None of us can have a full handle on this, but follow your sense of what's right and wrong, and of what values and goals you want for your kids, and then sometimes use media as a way to, either through critiquing it or through using it together, that you're teaching them to be savvy.